Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Room. One of the best things about Room is how it takes on its subject matter. I think a lot of films, when they're using a difficult subject matter, are more about the event of it rather than the effects that the event has on the protagonist or on the characters in the story. And that makes it a lot less relatable because people don't really relate to events, they relate to people for the most part. I don't know about you. What makes Room so interesting and so gripping, and why you hear about people crying and needing tissues during this movie, and people did cry when I saw it, I didn't. It's because this film is so much about the effects of something, and everyone can relate to that. Everyone can relate to the effect an event has on you because everyone has had something that has affected them, and that is more human. You're going to live more with the effects of something devastating more than the event itself. Obviously, this is something not a lot of people have lived through, but it's an interesting way to tackle it. It's about a woman who's been kidnapped and forced to live in a shed and basically a sex slave for this guy, and then she eventually has a kid, and the story actually starts when it's her son Jack's 5th birthday, and they've been living in the shed together for his whole life. He actually doesn't know anything outside of this little garden shed. You kind of get their world because you don't really have to see her as an actress, Brie Larson, who's playing the woman Joy, or Ma as she's called quite frequently, break down and become a zombie as she says she was during that time. You don't have to see all that. You just see her after being in there for 7 years with her son, so you almost kind of understand the world more because you're just shown the effects of living in there, and then of course shown the effects of them, since you probably know from the trailer, getting out of that shed and trying to reintroduce herself into society, and Jack trying to basically introduce himself into society after being kept in captivity for so long. Really, the director Lenny Abramson, this was actually based on a book by Emma Donoghue, who also wrote the screenplay, really understand how to talk about these characters. Some of the details about exactly how they're in the shed and the guy who put them there are sketchy and vague. That's because they're not important. They want you to understand these two characters and you have a strong, deep connection to them, just like a real issue movie should, because you should be able to see that different side of it. You know, every time I hear about these stories about some girl who's trapped in a basement or trapped in a room or trapped in a different shed in a compound or something like that, I always think about what the effect that would have on that woman. And in Room, we actually see that. We don't see the salacious side of it. We don't see how it's like a cult or anything like that. We see the effects that really has on a person, and I think that's what makes Room such a rich movie. Jack, played by Jacob Tremblay, and his young mother, played by Brie Larson, and they've been living in this small garden shed with just a skylight for a long time. She's been there for 7 years, and he's been there his entire life of 5 years, and they've been trapped there by this guy that we only know, and they only know as Old Nick, who uses a combination code to get in or out. Jack hides in the wardrobe when Old Nick comes over to have sex with his mom and sleep there, and Joy eventually realizes after she hears that Old Nick hasn't had a job in 6 months that she's worried about her survival and that they'll just kind of be trapped there and he won't come back with supplies and they'll starve. So she finds a way for Jack to get out. You'll have to see the movie for that part. And he does, and eventually leads police to his mother, and they both get out and start living with Joy's mother and new husband and start trying to reintroduce into society, even with all the media attention and the police investigations, as they try to move on with their lives and try to, for Jack, understand society, and for Joy to actually re-understand society and try to move on with her life after this traumatic experience of 7 years. One of the more interesting things about this movie is it's mainly from Jack's perspective. His perspective of never having left the room and thinking the whole world is Room, which they call Room. It's not just called that to avoid being confused with the movie The Room, but they do refer to it as Room. He lived there and thought it was his whole world, and they do have a great sequence when he gets out that they really do film it like he thinks it's like this incredible, crazy world, like he's almost overwhelmed by it. The cinematography in this isn't great, but in that sequence it really shines. If it was from Brie Larson's character's perspective, it would be a lot darker and sadder, a lot less understandable. Through this kid, you almost kind of start to piece things together and see it through a unique perspective, and this film very much has a perspective towards it. I think that's the other thing I really like about it, is it really has a distinct point of view. Lenny Abramson did that in his last film, Frank. I was really surprised that this this was the guy who directed Frank because they feel so different. Frank was a lot more of a unique film, but this film, he still finds a unique way to go about this movie. They have a great way of making this very personal. You really feel for these characters, both Jack and Joy, and what they're going through and how it's kind of hard for them. And you almost kind of understand where they're coming from, even though that might seem weird to understand where they're coming from. You probably don't actually understand where they're coming from, but you feel like you do because of the first half being them in the room and the second half them being without. You kind of get it. You get why he thinks all these things. This also is an interesting metaphor about parenting, how every parent's going to come to a realization that they have to protect their children and not tell them certain things because they're too young to handle it. Then they realize like they probably should have prepared their kids better for X situation. Parenting, it's not an exact science, and lots of people screw up and don't do the exact things that they probably should have. The metaphor that lies within this film is something that's very universal, and this plays up how universal this story can be because it's very unique. You don't hear about women being trapped in sheds and things like every day. It does happen every now and then, but it's still a unique experience. So you could think like, how am I going to relate to that? That seems awful. When this movie does certain things with that, you don't feel this distance from it. That's the interesting thing about it, is how close you felt with this and how kind of subtle and nuanced it is, rather than playing up having big showy moments. I know this is considered an Oscar movie, and it very much feels like one, but one that had all the showy moments removed and they had nothing to do with the plot. This movie's a lot better for it because those showy moments almost grab your attention away from a lot of these Oscar movies. In this film, it feels a lot more nuanced and a lot more about the characters. I think one of the bigger problems with this movie, however, is the score by Stephen Rennicks, which is really not very good at all. It kind of ruins certain scenes that the film probably could have done a lot subtler without his score, which overdoes it quite frequently. It doesn't complement what the film's already doing. A good score works with the director and works with what he's doing. There are certain scores that tell you what to feel and emotionally manipulate you, although film itself is emotional manipulation, so it's stupid to bring up in a film review, but a lot of people do anyway. When you're working with how the director's doing that, it feels amazing and beautiful and you're with it, but Stephen Rennick's score doesn't feel like it's working with it, and it feels like it's almost overpowering really quieter moments that don't need it. In the beginning, it felt like a movie score from like a Fox Searchlight, like Mini Major Little Miss Sunshine thing, which really just hurt the movie. I kind of wish there was a different score to this film. It's very problematic. It definitely hurts the emotions of this movie because you're almost trivializing it because of the shitty score. This film's really known for is its performances, particularly by Brie Larson, who's really started to become a major acting powerhouse lately. She does have a very subtle, nuanced performance, and she doesn't do these big moments that make you go, oh, Oscar. You think of an Oscar performance and it's someone giving a lot of ego, a lot of gravitas to something, and it's almost like she just wants to play this character. It doesn't matter to her about doing that. And I think Brie Larson shows how smart of an actress she really is because she understood how to play this. She's not playing it like she wants to get an Oscar nomination. She's playing it like a smart actress. Certainly I get sick of that this time of year. Like, it doesn't matter what happens with this movie. She did an amazing performance. There's this one scene in this where she's acting with Joan Allen and William H. Macy, and she more than holds her own. In fact, she feels like a contemporary to both of them, and they're both really great actors. William H. Macy's a really giving actor, but she like does not need it at all. And the fact that she can hold her own against those two shows how great of an actress she really is. She really does feel like not just their daughter, that she can confront them in such a way, and she really doesn't do it in a showy way. She does it in a way like you feel like you're at that dinner table. A very smartly nuanced and interesting and really real way. She's gonna have a problem with that right now, and it doesn't ever feel inappropriate or pushing or glaring. That scene at the dinner table, I think, says more about her as an actress than any scene in this movie, because it shows like that you can hold your own against those guys, like not just like do a good performance with those guys, but hold your own with William H. Macy and Joan Allen is amazing. Jacob Tremblay, who's very good in this film. A lot of people, I guess, downgraded because he's a kid and people bring up Can Kids Act? I think kids can act. He plays it off like a kid's understanding, and like, you know, he has the whole world figured out, even though in the film he's 5, although he actually is 8 in real life. He's really good because he plays up the wow factor of certain things. He gets the wonder of being a kid. He is a kid, but he understands how to play that wonder. And this is a kid who hasn't seen anything, who doesn't understand social cues, who's a couple years younger than he really should be emotionally and mentally. He plays it so naturally. William H. Macy was barely in it, but he's always good. Joan Allen was very good as the mother and kind of plays more angry than I've seen her play before in certain scenes, but almost understanding like it's a difficult situation she's in, certainly being the mother of this girl who got kidnapped. Everyone just plays everything in this film just exactly how, if you imagine imagine you were there, how you would react to certain things, but also in a very like internal way. Like you can tell like they don't know how to think about it. Room is kind of like an Oscar movie that understands the emotions of the people involved in something. And Lenny Abramson, who did do Frank, got what the emotions were dealing with genius and that unique, interesting, emotional situation. And Room gets that interesting, unique social situation just as well. You'd have to be a very smart director to make a movie like Room the way that he did, because it's hard to imagine being in there. It's not the film that you'd expect, but it's almost the film that makes more sense to you. When you hear about a story like this, it's always kind of the idea that I thought about what these women's lives would be like afterwards and during. And it's interesting to see a film that examines that and puts that on the screen so perfectly. If it had shown her being kidnapped and had like this performance where she's stuck in a room and somehow it's captivating, this movie's not about that. It's really about the two parts and what they're saying about one another and what they're saying about her and how she doesn't know what to do and how she is kind of emotionally stunted. Even though they got out of Room, things aren't perfect. There is no happy ending now. It's not like they're suddenly better because of it. They still have a long struggle to get through. Like, how's she going to get a job? There's going to be a lot of therapy involved. It's going to take a long time to get through this. And this film, it has them kind of trying to figure it out when it's something that no one can really try to figure out. When I'm watching this film, I'm relating to her. I also understand it so well. And it's like the specifics don't matter. I don't need to know why Old Nick lost his job, or even if that was a bunch of crap and he just said that, or why he did that, or why he picked Brie Larson, or anything like that, or an origin story. The thing is about filmmaking that Lenny Abramson and the screenplay by Emma Donahue really understood is you don't really need everything explained. You just need the things that are important. This might, you could say, a more of a deconstructionist idea to doing this kind of a movie when it goes through her doing like a primetime interview, and why people have to do that just really for financial reasons, to pay for lawyers, to pay for protection, to pay for medical bills. It gets more into the reality of it rather than the event of it. The reality is something we all have to live in, and that's something that when film captures, it means a lot more to us. And that's probably why people are crying at this. It's not just because it's emotional. And when you have to deal with reality, that's life. And that's something we all, fortunately or unfortunately, have to deal with. And Room having you deal with that reality is what makes it so smart and kind of subtle and makes it impactful. It speaks to you and reaches to you in a way that few films really ever try to do, to actually understand the human experience. The best way to do it is to do it like the human experience actually is. So if you have seen Room and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.